Hi, everybody. Welcome to this DGOP event. My name is Jill Zippin. I am the chairwoman of Democratic Jewish Outreach Pennsylvania. For those of you who are not familiar with DJOP, we're a federal political action committee that works to elect Democrats in the state of Pennsylvania. We sometimes go out of the four corners of Pennsylvania. We were active in the Georgia Senate race and in the Colorado Senate race as well. We are thrilled that you're here with us tonight. If you'd like to learn more about DGOP, please go to dgop.org and check us out. We're on Facebook, on a webpage, and Instagram, and on Twitter too. Tonight we are here to talk about the importance of turning our state houses blue. As many of you know, in the last election, instead of gaining state houses, we lost them. We have with us three special guests. We have Daniel Squadron from Future Now. We have State Representative Jared Solomon, and we have Senior Policy Advisor to the State Democratic Party, Mitch Cates. The way this evening is going to work, Dina will introduce Daniel, who will speak. Bert Siegel, the vice chair of our organization, will, and Dina is a board member. Bert will introduce Representative Jared Solomon, who will speak. I will introduce Mitch Cates, he will speak, and then we'll have a moderated discussion. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat. So we will begin with board member Dina Lichtman-Smith introducing Daniel Squadron.
Unmute.
You need to unmute. Okay, there you go.
Okay. So Jill, thank you. Let me introduce you to Daniel Squadron. Daniel started his political career as a consultant for the Department of Education in New York. He went on to work on several mayor campaigns and then ultimately worked with Chuck Schumer, doing a variety of things, and co-authored his book. In 2008, Daniel ran for New York Senate. He was 29. He ran against a 30-year incumbent who was the most powerful Democrat in the Senate, and Daniel won, becoming the youngest state senator at the time and the second youngest in all of New York's history. In 2010, Daniel won. In 2012, he was elected to the Senate again, representing the 26th district, which included Chinatown, Wall Street, Ground Zero, Lower Manhattan, and parts of Brooklyn. He won in a landslide in 2014 and ran unopposed in 2016. During that time, and when Daniel was in office, he secured millions of dollars for community parks, worked with Chuck Schumer on Governor's Island, and got hundreds of millions of dollars for public housing. In addition, Daniel focused his career and a lot of his legislation on banning military assault weapons, limiting high-capacity magazines, and expanding background checks. In 2017, Daniel announced his resignation from the Senate and that he would be working with entrepreneur Adam Pritzker and Dr. Jeffrey Sachs of Columbia University on a national initiative focused on electing stronger candidates and with a sharpened approach and better policies at the state level. These policies will be focused on creating a fairer, healthier future. In October of 2017, Daniel became the CEO of that initiative and was launched as Future Now. Finally, in the spirit of full transparency, I should tell you that Daniel Squadron is my son-in-law. Okay, and so it is with great pride that I introduce you to Daniel Squadron.
Thank you very much. And I want to say, for everyone here who has a Jewish mother-in-law, as I do, when for her birthday, she asks for the gift to be that you get to speak to a great group like this, that is a win-win-win. Great mother-in-law, great way to celebrate her birthday and a great opportunity to speak to all of you. So everyone wish Dr. Dina Lichtman-Smith a happy birthday. Come off mute if the administrator will let you, although Jill may kill me for that, or put it into the chat, or if you know how to use the emoticon things. Happy birthday to my mother-in-law, and this is how she wanted to spend her birthday, so pretty cool.
Happy birthday.
Thank you.
And thank you all for being here today and being here about state legislatures. That was more generous and extensive introduction than I'm used to, but it actually speaks to something really interesting. In that whole career, the possibility of getting this many people on a Thursday night together to talk about state legislatures would have strained all credibility, seemed basically impossible. I had a spiel when I was in office that if you could get 100 people in a room and they committed themselves for a year, their network, their expertise, their resources to impacting their state government, they could become within a year the single most important force in their state government that hadn't been there before. I probably gave that pitch over 100 times in office, and until Donald Trump was elected, a grand total, let me just recall, of 0 people ever took me up on it. 0, crickets. But after Trump's election, a lot of folks, like many of the folks on this call, wanted to do more. And we're open to this possibility that state legislatures offer the best opportunity to have the biggest impact in your community, in your state, but also in the future of our country. What's so exciting about an event like tonight is Donald Trump's been beaten. The US Senate has flipped. The US House is under Speaker Nancy Pelosi. And yet, state legislatures continue to be the breeding ground and the petri dish for an ethno-nationalist, proto-fascist vision of our country and our government, every bit as much as they were before Donald Trump rose out of that miasma to the Oval Office in a way everyone ignored, and in a way that today, post the inauguration of President Biden, I have been deeply concerned every night when I go to bed and every morning when I wake up, people would go back to sleep. Because, with no hyperbole, the idea that the charismatic leader of a movement like this is no longer in the Oval Office, meaning that that movement is dead, is simply not true in a way that history tells us again and again. Movements like this hibernate and then come back stronger than they were before. The way our country is structured, this movement's ability to hibernate, not in complete passivity or outside of any reins of power, but within the 50 state capitals, is stronger, more threatening, and has more risk for our future than most people could imagine. The movement to suppress votes from Georgia to Arizona to Florida to North Carolina and beyond isn't just about propagating the idea that non-white people should have as many limits as possible to vote that has too often carried in our country's history. It's also fundamentally about the big lie, fundamentally about the January 6th insurrection, fundamentally about the effort to overrule the Electoral College with the will of state lawmakers instead of the will of voters in these states. It is about being able to steal the federal government and every level of government back, regardless of what the voters do. State legislatures are a lot more than that too. Care about, such small policies as healthcare, education, infrastructure, equity, democracy. State legislature's most important place. You care about the future of the party. You want to find the next Stacey Abrams, Barack Obama. Well, you know where you could have looked 10 years before you ever heard of them? State legislatures. State legislatures are the place where we're going to defend and protect the republic. They're the place where we're going to be able to improve millions of lives so fewer people want to peddle and buy poisonous rhetoric that will destroy the republic. And state legislatures are where the future of politics is defined. And the best news about all of it is it's incredibly easy to have an impact because we have a really great group with us tonight. But rest assured, most people are not spending tonight talking about or thinking about state legislatures. And that means that a small number of people can continue to have that huge outsized impact that I screamed into a cave about for a decade and that I have been so excited to work with the growing community on for the last 4 years, and really excited for the conversation tonight, including an actual state lawmaker, which for whom, by the way, we want to thank you for your service. I know most state lawmakers run for the job for the riches, the gratitude, and the wealth. But if those things aren't working out for you, Rep. Solomon, at least you're getting a thank you tonight from DJOP. Thank you, Joe.
Great. Bert, why don't you introduce State Representative Jared Solomon, and make sure you unmute yourself because you're muted. Okay.
Thank you. It is a real pleasure to be with so many Democrats, though. It always it makes me feel good. And I want to point out, for those of you who did not know Daniel's father Howard was one of the real champions, not only of advocacy of the Jewish community, but of liberal politics. He was president of the American Jewish Congress and the Conference of Presidents, and he was somebody I greatly admired. So I just wanted to let you know that, Dan, and you have clearly followed in your dad's footsteps. Sometimes you have an opportunity to meet a young person, and you think you're really going to go far. We were trying to remember how many years ago, how old Jared was when I first met him. I thought he was 12 because he was bar mitzvahed at my synagogue, but he says he was even younger. Jared and my son, who's a couple of years younger than he is, actually went to school together. And Jared, who was involved in school politics, actually encouraged my son to do that as well. But thank God he doesn't want to follow Jared and become a state representative. Although there are people in our community who've suggested that he do that. Jared actually has an interesting background because he went to a Quaker school, and then he went to Swarthmore. He went to a Catholic law school, Catholic University Law School. He did serve in the U.S. Army, which I think is somewhat atypical for somebody who's gotten a Quaker education. He was first elected as state rep in 2016. Where he defeated an incumbent who served, I think, about 40 years. His predecessor was in his 20s when he was elected. So that's something, Dale, something you share. Although he was defeated, he did not drop out. He was defeated by Jared. Not surprisingly, those of us who know Jared, though, issues of integrity and disclosure on the part of lobbyists and elected officials have been a major concern of his. Not necessarily the most popular of legislation, but obviously very, very important, particularly in a state like Pennsylvania, where we is a somewhat murky arena for politics. So, when Jared came into office, he recognized that a lot of house cleaning needed to be done. Jared is not the kind of state representative who showboats these things. I mean, one of the things that I was always really impressed by Jared is I would have to find out about some really outstanding legislation that he introduced. But that's just the kind of person he is, because I think Jared really does see being an elected official as being a public servant. He's an accomplished legislator. He's taken on the task also, though, being a real champion of the people in the district he represents, where he was born, in fact, Northeast Philadelphia. He played a major role in maintaining the financial viability of the small businesses located in, as we were discussing before we all came online, it's a very, very multi-ethnic district, and it's got the greatest variety of ethnic restaurants you would ever want. And Jared introduced these restaurants online to constituents who probably never would think of going into a Pakistani or African restaurant. There are a lot of senior citizens there, and they know they can count on him if they have a problem, and also the problems that state reps don't normally deal with. So he really is into constituent service, but in a very real way. And like President Biden, Jared is a real mensch. And I'm glad that he is my friend. Jared?
Bert, thank you. What a pleasure. Bert probably does not remember this, but at every major point in my life, when I was contemplating doing this program, Operation Understanding, which is a program that brings Blacks and Jews together in the city of Philadelphia, explores the historic relationship. Whether it was going to Swarthmore, running for office, I met with Bert first. And he has been a mentor and a friend. And Bert, I really appreciate that introduction. Jill, thank you for the invite. Mitch, it's great to be here with you. And Daniel, you are completely right. I do this for the riches, the gratitude, and the wealth. I haven't yet realized that, but at any moment, it might just come about.
Between years 30 and 40. So
that's right. So I'm so excited, as Daniel expressed as well, that people are here ready to go, passionate about working to turn the PA House and PA Senate blue. Let me tell you, this is a story that in Pennsylvania, I have heard time and time again. My first campaign was working for a woman named Connie Williams back in 2001 when I was helping as a volunteer coordinator, and we won. And I thought, this is so incredibly easy. First campaign, ticked off a win. And from that moment in 2001, what we were all told is the blue wave was coming. The trajectory was in our favor. We were then going to take over the legislature. Not so much. In 2002, with the Rendell coattails, we were going to sweep in and take over the legislature. Not so much. Corbett, probably one of the worst governors in Pennsylvania history. That was going to bring the victories we needed in Pennsylvania. Not so much. And then, of course, in 2020, when we have the worst president in modern history, probably in history, we lost seats in the Pennsylvania House and did not pick up in the Pennsylvania Senate. What I can say is that key to this, and sometimes overlooked, is not just an attention to the DPI, because I always hear about DPI. What are the performance numbers for a district? And every district, we're told, if we just dump resources into that district and the DPI matches the resources that we're putting in, voila, we're going to win. The problem a lot of times is sometimes we don't necessarily think enough about the candidate match for that district. We sometimes don't think about the work that particular candidate is putting in. In 2020, I can't tell you how difficult it was when we shut down our door knocking operation in Pennsylvania, where our candidates who were challenging incumbents, while those Republicans were going door to door, we were at home making calls. And in a state rep race, even in a state Senate race, people want to be able to see you and talk local issues. It is that personal touch. It's that candidate quality. And for everyone on this call, on this Zoom, it is getting involved as early as possible, because a lot of times we see an influx of resources and volunteers really late in a campaign, where if we would have pushed that out 6-8 months before Election Day, we could turn that district blue. Thank you so much. I look forward to the conversation.
Thank you so much, Jared. I have the pleasure of introducing Mitch Cates, who is the senior advisor to the Pennsylvania Democratic Party. Prior to that, he was the political director of Mike Bloomberg for president campaign. He is a longtime political consultant, and he ran a political consultancy that worked for campaigns ranging from municipal races like city council and mayoral, statewide judicial constitutional amendment, to federal US Congress and presidential, and international prime minister and parliamentary. Some of his campaign career highlights: he was the campaign manager for David Weck, State Supreme Court in Pennsylvania. He was the campaign manager and senior political advisor, and I'm going to pronounce this wrong, but for Hashim Tasi, Prime Minister of Kosovo. He was the senior political advisor and operative for Benzinza Ashvili from the Republic of Georgia. He was the GOTV field coordinator for Bob Buckhorn, Tampa mayor's race in Tampa, Florida. The campaign manager for Charlie Justice, Florida State Senate. He was the campaign manager for Mary Mulhern, Tampa City Council. And he's done much more. We're very excited that he is now in Pennsylvania and is going to work to turn our state legislatures blue. So take it away, Mitch, and tell us about what's going on in PA and what you've seen nationwide as well in terms of elections.
Right, Jill, thank you so much. It's always an honor to be on a Zoom session with Jared, although I wish it was in person and we were eating in a nice restaurant. But now that now we're getting vaccinated, I'm going to be out east soon. We will be eating. Listen, I'm so thrilled to see so many people on this call, and I'm going to show my age in a sort of way. Daniel and Jared will get it. Many of you won't get it. But I call people that spend their Thursday nights talking about politics, political goonies. There's something wrong with us, but we're here for a reason, and it's important because goonies never say die. Listen, I got my start in politics and campaigns much like many of you. I just showed up to volunteer for a state Senate race in Massachusetts, where I'm originally from. And unlike Jared Solomon, who brags about winning his first race, we got defeated, and it was painful and heartbreaking, and didn't want to get out of bed for a couple of days. But, we grinded on. I eventually found myself, I moved from the Boston area to Pittsburgh on a dare, fell in love with that city quickly, got involved on the local level with campaign work just to volunteer. Also found my way to volunteering for things like, Clinton Gore, 1992. Once you start volunteering and you get into it, this thing goes from a hobby to an obsession. And then somewhere along the way, it turned into a career for me. I found myself jettisoned back to Boston to do a mayor's race. I got dropped into Florida, where I spent my grade school years in Miami, and my mom and sister still live there. I got parachuted into the Tampa Bay area to do a state Senate race that everybody in Florida said there's no way in hell a Democrat can win that seat. It was a long-held Republican seat. Some of us are stubborn and we don't believe that. And we knocked the hell out of doors, and we upended and shocked the state. And I have to tell you, this was in 2006. The Republicans spent over $7 million to defend a seat, and they only meet for like six weeks for a session. We had less than 2 million, and we beat them. So I ended up staying in Florida for the next 5 or 6 years, which is why I'm still in therapy. Most of the work that I did was on down ballot races. I just told somebody recently that, when I knew everybody working on the Obama campaign in 2008, but I desperately wanted to win that county commission seat in Hillsborough, defeating a Republican who helped ban books on gay pride in the public libraries, and worked with the first openly gay candidate to win that race. And I did a bunch of other races up and down the ballot, from school board to, Jill mentioned, a city council race, state Senate, House, statewide. Then I found myself, I got an email from my political guru who said, send me your current resume and get your passport ready. I didn't know what the hell he was talking about, but 2.5 weeks later, I was in Tbilisi, Georgia. I went from a nice warm winter in St. Pete, Florida, to it was snowing at 3 a.m. when I landed in Tbilisi. And I can tell you firsthand that I could see Russia from my kitchen. But, I spent the year of my life there, and against all odds, again, because the rest of the world said there's no way in hell that a Western supported president of Georgia was going to lose to an upstart bunch of opposition parties. we did win and we overthrew the government. And there's something pretty cool about overthrowing a government. I spent a couple of more years working overseas. I worked in Kosovo for Prime Minister Thaci, the founding father of Kosovo. I was in the Ukraine. I was in Macedonia. And then I was on an island in the middle of the Indian Ocean when I got an email from a friend of mine who I don't know if he's on here, Cliff Levine. He's a very dear friend of mine from Pittsburgh. And Steve Irwin is here too, who's one of my favorite people in the world. And he sent me an email. He says, when you get back to the States, because I was moving back to Pittsburgh from Florida, he said, you need to meet with this guy, David Wecht. He's running for the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. I immediately looked it up. I Googled it while I was in the middle of the Indian Ocean, and I saw that this was the most important race in the history of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. And I dare anybody to challenge me on that, because it was the first time in history that 3 seats were open on the state Supreme Court out of 7. And at the time, there was 2 and 2, and whatever happened with those 3 was going to dictate what happens with the state Supreme Court. Long story short, it's a good story, but for the first time ever, maybe, Democrats swept the entire statewide slate. We won all 3 state Supreme Court races. We won the 1 open seat on Superior, and we won 1 open seat on Commonwealth Court. That may have been the first time Democrats have been able to pull that off in an odd year election, especially. Well, a couple of years later, that paid dividends, I guess you could say, because that court decided to hear the case of the gerrymandered districts in regards to the congressional map, which changed the congressional map, which ended up seeing Pennsylvania go from 13 to 5 Republican to Democrat to 9 to 9 and 1 competitive election cycle. And folks, I know we're going to talk about this a lot on this call because this is incredibly important, but the things that Daniel were talking about, the things that Jared have been addressing, they all come down to redistricting. And we are right now smack dab in the middle of something that happens every 10 years. And part of the reason why we've lost state legislatures is because we didn't have the ability to fight for and be a part of what happens with the redistricting process. But because we were able to sweep those seats in the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, we have a Democratic governor. We still have a Republican-controlled legislature of wackos, and they're going to do their damnedest to try to do it again. But we have, I believe, the ability to fight back. And part of what we need to do is be vigilant and watch what happens in this process. We're already going to lose a congressional seat, folks. So we're going from, from what is it, 18 seats to 17 seats. So there's going to be a shift in the congressional map here in Pennsylvania. The last thing I'll say, and then I'm looking forward to the discussion, is one of the programs that I developed down in Florida and I'm running here through the state party is a program called Vote Local. Because one of the things that I identified both in Florida and I see there's some Florida people here too, so I'm sending you my thoughts and prayers. But both in Florida and Pennsylvania, we've been doing the same thing. And ironically, as different as these 2 states are, and one's a Commonwealth, we both have 67 counties. But for far too long, both states, both parties have only really organized in 12 or 13 counties, the ones that had the most registered Democrats, and done very little in the other counties. And while we're able to pull our Democratic votes out from Broward or Philadelphia and Pennsylvania, the Republican turnout and the Republican win numbers have increased so much that Florida is still, I saw somebody say it's purple, I don't know. But we can't do that anymore. And one of the things that I'm happy to share when we get to this discussion is that that's not happening in Pennsylvania. We are actively going to go after it on the ground in all 67 counties in Pennsylvania. So let's start questions because there's a lot to talk about.
So the first question, just to sort of set the stage here, why are state legislatures so important, and how do we get voters to understand the importance of state and local elections? People get very excited about a presidential race or a Senate race, but it seems to me that the real work is done at the state level. So why are state legislatures important, and how do we get voters to understand? Let's start with you, Jared.
So thanks, Joe. I think Mitch hit on a big one. It decides the maps. They decide how we are going to relate to our elected officials on the federal level and on the state level. The contours of those districts, whether communities are kept intact, whether there's going to be invidious efforts to divide communities through packing, hijacking, stacking districts, which hurts the democratic process. That begins and ends in the legislature. And there's been an effort through fair districts and other organizations to really raise up the profile of state legislators through looking through that prism. Each and every time, Jill, there's sort of, when we're looking to do reform to that process, the Republicans say we don't want to reform the redistricting process because we think we're going to win, but prior to the election, the next election after redrawing the lines. Democrats say the same exact thing. I strongly believe if we just had fair districts, Democrats will always win because we have the better message. We just need lines that are representative of our communities, give our message a shot. If that doesn't juice Democrats to start caring about these elections and get people to donate and volunteer and knock doors, I'm not sure what will.
Daniel, how do you get people to understand the importance of these elections through Future Now? Because that's one of the things, the main purposes of Future Now is to make people understand about how consequential these elections are. Can you talk a little bit about what Future Now is doing to get voters to understand this?
Sure, yeah. Future Now exists entirely for state legislatures. Sometimes people say, oh, well, after you grow a little bit, then are you also going to, what are you going to do at that point? And I say more state legislatures. The reason for that is not because I had any ambition when I graduated college or was starting my career in politics to spend my life in state legislatures. They appeared to me to be fairly unpleasant places that were, far away from home and the opposite of glamorous, as Jared and I talked about before. And all of that is true. They can often be fairly unpleasant. My job was 153 miles from my home. Jared's is pretty far from his home as well. And, the number one perk were free bottles of seltzer. So, but the reason I find my career in state legislatures is the power and potential is mind-boggling. And the level of commitment is really low. So at Future Now, that's something we take on both through our political action committee, Future Now Fund, which raises money from folks, most of it from grassroots givers who organize themselves into giving circles. We would love to have a DJOP giving circle. Get to raise dollars and then decide which state you're going to be committing them to. We also have a policy affiliate nonprofit, Future Now Action, that actually works with lawmakers in office because, most lawmakers don't have any staff. Actually, in Pennsylvania and New York and a couple of other states, there's a reasonable number of staff. They're not nearly enough. But in most states, when we go around and talk to state lawmakers, they say, how many staff do you have? And they say one, and we say per person, and they say no for the group of us. That's by design. The design there, and the answer to your question, Jill, is they are designed to let narrow special interests have all of the influence, and that impacts everything. So the way we get people involved is we never start by talking about state legislatures. The moment you start that way, you've lost. At Future Now Fund, what we do is we say, hey, do you care about reproductive rights? Do you think that adults in this country should be able to make medical decisions about their own body with their doctor? Or do you think the doctor should go to prison for doing that? Well, you're not going to be able to elect members of the US Supreme Court or not, but you know that the cases they're going to hear to destroy adults' opportunity to go get reproductive health and other health care actually is bills that come out of state legislatures. If every state legislature in America was reasonable, this Supreme Court, even if it got more conservative, wouldn't be able to take away people's health care because bills would never get passed in state legislatures that take away people's reproductive health. Every time there's one of these horrible shootings and massacres, everyone looks at Mitch McConnell. Is he going to let background checks go this time? Spoiler alert, he's not. But in the meantime, tens of millions of people now live in states that have background checks because of state legislatures. And the biggest one, Jill, though, is this. It is great to be involved in politics. You should vote. You should support people when they run for president and US Senate and governor. And the odds, even of this extraordinary group altogether, having a material impact on the outcome are incredibly low. And people are almost used to that, right? They feel like observers to the destruction of their own democracy. All of you are inspired enough to do something about it anyway. But if you were being really honest and we were alone, and I said, do you think that you are determining the outcome on the federal races you get involved in? Most of you would acknowledge, maybe not. It's the right thing to do. It's meaningful work. It's a great community, but probably not. In state legislatures, you actually are determining the outcome. We have giving circles where the median contribution is $100 a person, where collectively they gather folks and raise $25,000 and become literally the largest single giver to the effort to turn a state legislative district, to change what's going to happen with reproductive health or gun safety or healthcare or education or the fundamentals of democracy. So the number one way to get people involved in state legislatures is to say, you really care about the hours you spend having the biggest impact, the dollars you give having an outsized impact. State legislatures are it. Federal stuff is great. Lots of people are doing it with lots and lots of money. State legislatures, 1/10 or less of the cost has 10 times the impact.
Great. When we look at the battleground states across the nation, Georgia, Pennsylvania, Florida, Arizona, Wisconsin, we see red controlled legislatures. And as a matter of fact, the legislatures have gotten more red. If you look at the 100 legislative bodies, 61 are Republican held, 37 are Democratic held. Before 2020, the numbers were 59 and 39. But at the same time, we see Democrats winning federal elections. When I look at Georgia, we see Ossoff and Warnock winning. Pennsylvania went for Joe Biden in this election. Where is the disconnect? Why are we losing state houses yet winning at the federal level? Mitch, I'm going to throw this one to you.
Thanks, Jill. So part of that is that there, the other side, and I hate to do this like there's two sides, but there is. And the other side has been very methodical, and they've been thinking long ball. So in 1992, when Bill Clinton got elected president, he became the most dangerous person ever because he knew how to talk to the middle. And so Newt Gingrich and his band of merry men started that contract with America. And part of that contract was to start focusing on very, very local races, school boards, city councils, state legislatures, so that if they won at those levels, then they would be able to control the process for when the next election cycles came. They've been doing this for a couple of decades now. Florida has been entirely controlled without one change at all since 1998. Since 1998, the Republicans have controlled the state legislature and the governor's mansion. Here in Pennsylvania, we've at least had like governors, Democratic governors, and there's been a little bit of back and forth with the state legislature. But the problem was when we run into those years when it's a redistricting time. By the way, I don't want to go into the weeds or details, but for the chaos that was going on last year during the US Census, don't think for 1 second that was absolutely planned out, because every one of our battleground states lost a seat and all these other red states gained seats. Now, I know that there's population shifts, but please, New York loses a seat because of 89 fewer people that signed up for the census, and they were waffling that the whole time. So I wanted to just say real quick to carry on what Daniel and Jared said. One of the things that the Democratic Party and Democrats, let's blame ourselves. We always get focused on the top of the ticket. You know, the presidential race is super sexy and everybody wants to be a part of that, or the US Senate race. Those are the ones that attract a lot of attention. But it's the down ballot races that we really need to focus on instead of going top down. President Joe Biden just last night said trickle down economics doesn't work. Guess what? Trickle down politics doesn't work either. There's no such thing as coattails. We have to fight for every seat, and we have to start at the local level to do that. And one of the things that's encouraging, I'll throw shade where it belongs, but what's encouraging is things like this, because there's organizations like this happening all over Pennsylvania and in other states that are focusing on down ballot races. We have organizations like yours and Turn PA Blue and others, and Order of the Phoenix out here in Pittsburgh. Their focus is on down ballot races. These candidates are personal to them. They're friends. They're people that you see every day. And those races are the ones that affect people's lives every day. And there are more and more people that are stepping up and going into the trenches. And the last thing I'll say, because I want to encourage people, is that this is the first time I've seen in forever, in an odd year, because I don't use off year, there's no such thing, but in an odd year election cycle, I have not seen anybody in the activist world say, you know what, I just worked my ass off in 2020. I need to take 6 months or a year off. I'll see you in 2022. That is not happening at all. Activist is as strong as it's ever been. And Jared will tell you this. We just faced a very, very dangerous bill this past session where those Republican monsters were going to gerrymander our state courts. And they were going to create, instead of statewide races, districts, so that they could forever control the courts. And if it wasn't for the fact that people like Jared were fighting them in session, lobbyists were hitting them from behind, but activists were calling state legislatures, and they weren't just focused on theirs, they were focused on Republican legislatures. And they must have scared the crap out of a couple of them, because there were a couple that flipped and they tabled that bill. Thank God, because there would have been, in our primary elections this year, on the ballot to gerrymander courts, and it would have had a devastating effect for Pennsylvania.
Jared, as someone who has boots on the ground, literally, as an elected official, why do you think that our House got redder? And when I look at other states, DGOP is a proud member of the Jewish Battleground Coalition, and we have conversations, we're shocked in many ways that our legislatures are becoming more red. As someone who's there, do you have an explanation?
Yeah, let me take you back, Jill, to again, this prior election, 2020, was supposed to be a sweep, right? We were thinking about who's going to be the Democratic speaker. It wasn't just we were going to win the majority, it was by how much. And so one of the things I did is I contributed to a lot of the top tier races. And before I would contribute, I would reach out to the candidate and I would just, check in, before you give someone money. Sometimes I just like to see what's going on. And I talked to one candidate. It was over the summer. And I said, how's the campaign going? He said, Jared, I'm up 14 points in the latest poll. He said, 14 points? I said, isn't that a pretty Republican district? Well, I'm up 14 points and we're just going to kind of wait to pick things up back in September. So I then checked in with the Republican who was running, and I said, what's going on? What do you think of this race? And the Republican, as I'm talking to this person, is out doing doors, is engaging voters. That is so key. When I beat a 42-year incumbent, before I even ran, I made a very conscious decision that this was a seat I wanted to win so much that I knew every day I was going to get up and be passionate about it, get up early, go to bed late until I was able to win. And if you don't have that, and if you're not engaging voters and bringing that energy and joy to a campaign and work ethic, we're just not going to be able to take back these seats.
How many
I agree.
How many doors did you knock?
What's that?
How many doors did you knock?
Oh, it had probably 8,000, 8 to 10,000.
Wow.
9,634 13 years ago to beat my 30-year incumbent. You never
Not-
forget
not
those
that-
doors.
Not that
See?
you're counting. Not that
Jared
you're
couldn't be more right.
counting. Dan, I have a quick question for you. So before Biden's speech last night, I was watching Steve Kornacki and his khakis. And one of the things that he said, it was a very interesting statistic, that 64% of all Americans, which includes Republican and Democratic voters, like the policies coming out of the White House. But when GOP voters were asked whether or not they approve of Biden, only 11% of them did. How can we get voters to see the connection between Democratic policies and Democratic candidates? And this is very important at the state level, because while they may approve of a particular policy, it seems to me when a GOP voter or sometimes even an independent voter sees the D in front of that name, they sort of recoil. Or they vote in the traditional way. I've always voted Republican, so now I'm going to vote Republican. Why is there that discrepancy, and how can we get more people to vote Democratic?
You know, this is an important piece, and both Mitch and Jared touched on this. When you're not in power, it's sometimes hard to convince folks of how you're going to have a materially positive impact in their life once you are in power. And so you're a little more dependent on the campaign itself. And in the last 6 or 8 weeks, campaigns have limits on how much they can change people's opinions in individual local races compared to what's happening in the national movement. So just an example of this is Future Now Fund endorsed 171 candidates, the overwhelming majority running for Republican-held seats across 13 states in 2020. Of those 171 candidates, a grand total of 0 endorsed, quote, defund the police, 0 of the 171. 3/4 were attacked for their support of defund the police. It's not actually a conversation about that issue and what impact it has or doesn't have. It's actually a much more important conversation about the fact that if you're trying to brand yourself and define yourself in the last 6 weeks, you are at the whims of the gods. Whether those gods are, the editors at MSNBC and the New York Times, the Washington Post, or Donald Trump and Joe Biden, it is no longer in your control. Governing well in ways that actually impact people's lives in ways they feel change the game. When I worked for Chuck Schumer, it was 2003 and 4. He was running for his first re-election in New York to the US Senate. He would always say, I would like to shore this race up by January 1st of 2004, not election day. What he meant was govern in a way that means people are already going to know they want you again. We're not good at this. We're not good at this for a bunch of reasons. One is donors on our side generally do it because it's the right thing to do and they're interested and they have some tax deductible dollars that they want to donate. So that means that we have this incoherent system where these tax deductible dollars are going to causes that have nothing to do with politics, and then smaller amounts of money at the last second are going to politics. On the right, there's a literal return on investment for investing in politics year-round, especially local politics, because another thing state governments do is regulate, for example, extractive industries like the Coke industries. So they can spend whatever it takes, not because they want the glamour and the fun of the presidential race, not because they get excited and nervous in the last 6 weeks, but because they are making long-term business decisions and investments. Meanwhile, we have this incoherent system where we talk about policies on the one hand for a few months and then campaigns for a few weeks, and they don't work. The most important thing that's come out of the Biden administration wasn't last night. The fact that stimulus bill was designed for people to know that stimulus bill had happened. This was a great moment for those of us who believe government can have a positive impact in people's lives. Every time someone goes and gets a COVID vaccine from a National Guards person or in a public facility, that is a great moment because we have a view of the world, and it's that government has a role to play in creating an opportunity, a society with opportunity that is healthy, sustainable, and prosperous for all. Their view is leave it to the Kochs. We need to do a better job of being willing to say our vision works, not just in the last 6 weeks when we're fighting from behind, but throughout the entire cycle. Good governing is the best political strategy. And then if we failed, we hand the keys to Mitch in the last 6 weeks and hope he can work some magic.
So this goes along with what you're saying. One of the complaints I hear frequently from Democrats is, our policies are great. We have better policies, but we seem to be very poor messengers. When you hear Republicans, they always fall in line. The old expression, Republicans fall in line, Democrats fall apart. We seem to have 18 different messages on one issue instead of one coherent message. Do you agree that the Republicans are better messengers and we have better policy? And if that's the case, how do we fix it? I'm going to go to you, Mitch.
So I think there's a little bit, there's some truth in that. But listen, first of all, I'm a message nut. Message is everything. The two most important things about an effective campaign are having the right candidate. Thank you, Jared, for saying that. And number two, having a message. And your message can't be what you think it should be. You have to understand the seat you're running for, the district you're running in, and what issues matter most to the people of that district in the election cycle that you are running in. Now, Republicans have forever gotten in line, and they are still certainly doing that. But I think, again, I'm trying to find the silver lining here. I think the Republicans are losing the message battle because they don't have issues anymore. While we're talking about shots in arms and ARP money, they're talking about Mr. Potato Head, right? And so one of the things that we must do for the next 2 years, and I'm not the only one that has this opinion, is to talk about these very specific good government programs like ARP, like the fact that COVID shots went into 200 million arms, that people got, checks showing up in their bank account literally the day after the thing passed, which is absolutely remarkable. The other side, many of their candidates run by saying that government is broken. They get elected and then they prove it. We need to show them that government works, and that's why you need to elect more of us, and why you need to reelect those that are actually making things happen. And it's always going to break down to a partisan battle, but we do have to lock down and talk about, Daniel, I really, I can't emphasize enough how important those words that you said are. We finally have some very specific issues that we can talk about that do affect people's lives every day, literally putting food on in their mouths, literally giving them the ability to leave their house safely. We did that. The Republicans foolishly got in line, maybe the worst ever, at a time where, how about if some of them showed up? I don't know if we've ever been able to say that we are the only party that was able to get you that money and get you those COVID shots, because every single person on the other side voted against it.
And next question is for all three of you. We talked about the candidates and door knocking, but can you discuss the real importance of grassroots organizing to win back state houses? Because it seems that winning back these state houses should be grassroots as opposed to a top-down approach. And why don't we start with Dan, Jared, and then Mitch on this issue, because this is really important.
So it's really important. I want to, there's a couple things about grassroots organizing that, are a real talk, and I'm actually glad I get to go first, because if I was still on the ballot, I would never say this. And I think if I was working for a caucus, I wouldn't say this either. So neither Jared nor Mitch need to agree with me on this explicitly. But, grassroots organizing is important and great. But too often, I think folks say, I don't want to get involved in the money game. I just want to do grassroots organizing. And that idea plays into the hands of these radical right-wing special interests I've been talking about tonight. Because, you know who's never does that? Charles Koch. And we're like, I don't want to write a check. I'm going to make some phone calls tonight. The idea that organizing money is not grassroots organizing is a poisonous posture that we have on the left that absolutely disempowers us. Grassroots organizing is critical for two reasons. One, it actually is the way to get more people involved who can contribute whatever amount of money they have so that candidates can communicate with voters on a mass scale. That is grassroots organizing. The truth is, having lots of folks who aren't the candidate out knocking on doors is important. It's good. Having the candidate knock on doors based on all the research is eons better. You're better off giving the candidate money so that they're not on the phone and at a fundraiser and they're knocking on doors 7 days a week. By the way, you're best off saying, you know what? I'll give you $20 this week and I'll give you $20 next week if you've knocked on 100 doors between now and then. That is really the interplay here. We're talking about building power, and the way to do that is to be deeply involved in the state legislative level. In the last few weeks, by the way, going out, knocking on doors, making phone calls starts mattering a lot. Before that, and this is the part Jared and Mitch will not acknowledge, before that, we're just keeping you busy and involved because we need you at the end. It's at the end that we need people. It's earlier that we need people to build our movement. And it is really important that all of us start thinking strategically and about power and not as much about what we've done or not. The final thing grassroots organizing I'd say is this. Huge resources are going into it now after what happened in Georgia. And thank goodness. Stacey Abrams is one of the true, and I say this not lightly, one of the true geniuses in American politics right now. And that's great news. But most of that grassroots organizing is going to winning statewide elections, which means to the most vote-rich places, which means not to the most competitive state legislative districts. So the other thing I would ask is that if you are working with any of these grassroots organizations, keep doing it. It is great work. And start asking them, are you also organizing in competitive state legislative districts, even though they're not as vote-rich for statewide elections?
I think that, Daniel, I'm going to take you back to the first point you made, which is that early on, which is the impact the dollars have on a state legislative race. So the folks on this call, and I did this with donors, the folks on this Zoom, you can literally see the results of your contribution, which you're not going to typically see in a congressional U.S. Senate campaign, presidential campaign. So I would meet with the donor and say, here is the amount of money that I'm asking because this will fund a mailer in the last 2 weeks of the election, and it's going to go to this group of voters because we need to turn them out for election day. I think that's pretty powerful, and you can't do that in larger races. The other thing is what I did, because I lost my first race when I ran in 2014, and it was not a good experience when I ran. It was 158 votes, and I said, when I run next time, I want to try and build in a cushion with voters that typically might not vote. So a year prior to the election, when I was told you could not organize the Chinese American community in my community, which is extremely diverse, I worked with a team of volunteers, some of which were Chinese American, to break down the language barrier, translated my materials in Fujianese and Cantonese, and we registered voters and then tracked those voters to election day and produced a significant number of Chinese American voters at the polls. So you can, I think, do some of that work. And again, that work early on is going to be very impactful. And also you turn out, and as a grassroots organizer, another 25, 50 votes, that can mean the election.
And Mitch, you get the last word here.
Okay. So I'm a big fan of organizing and activists. One of the things that I tell every single candidate is you can't just do one thing really good and expect to win, like raise $1 bazillion and put it all on TV. You have to do many things well. And I'm finding that activists, as we move cycle to cycle, are getting, they're taking on more responsibility. They're getting more sophisticated. They're not just door knockers. They're also texters and phoners, but they're also contributors. And they foster more contribution. And they're also digital organizers that get the word out, far and wide as well. And you can't, like campaigns have limited resources and limited time. The more people, the more boots you have on the ground, the better the opportunities to get those one last votes. I'm not going to tell you about the one time I ran for office for city council and I lost by 45 votes, Jared Solomon, but that just pissed me off to where now it became a career. I just went on the other side of it. But one of the things that I want to tell you all, because this has to do, Daniel, about resources. One of the things that's happened in Pennsylvania, and this is incredibly important, y'all, because Pennsylvania was such a key focus to the rest of the world as a battleground state. And we saw people coming in and contributing and continuing to contribute. By the way, they're still contributing. So in an election time, in an odd year, when most state parties are downsizing, and then they're going to ramp up in the governor's Senate race, we're actually building up now. We have, when I was the political director of the state party in 2016, the political department was me. Now there's a department. We have a political director. We've got a Northwest, Northeast, Southwest, South Central, regional directors. We just hired a Latinx community organizer. We just hired a rural organizer for Pennsylvania. And we're just about to hire a Black outreach director too. We're building up. And one of the other things that we're doing, and I hope everybody in here starts nodding and clapping, one of the things that Democrats did not do last year, because we were trying to save lives, is we weren't registering voters, right? Pennsylvania used to have a huge Democratic advantage in voter registration, that shrunk in just this last cycle. Well, the state party launched a program a couple of weeks ago, and whoop, there it is in your chat box. We started a very aggressive, very proactive program to register voters right now, not in 2022, but right now, so that we can engage in conversations, get to build community with individuals, and not just show up and say, hey, vote for my candidates. We're taking the time to have conversations, even in places where it's not, we haven't in years, like some of our rural communities, many of our rural communities in Pennsylvania. We're going to have conversations with those folks. Prove that we don't have horns in our heads that we shave down in the morning, that we do have common interest, that there are things that we believe in that they believe in. And while the other side is gone totally crazy on the QAnon crazy train, there are plenty of voters that are trying to figure out, now what am I supposed to do? This isn't the Republican Party that I grew up with. Unless we have conversations with them, they're either not going to vote, or they're going to still pull the lever for the other side because they don't know there's an option. This is about grassroots organizing. And as the late great Speaker of the House, Tip O'Neill, all politics is local. And that's why we have to think that way and vote that way and keep pushing it that way. And by the way, everybody get involved. Like, we're doing this voter registration program through the state party, but we are actively asking our allies all across Pennsylvania to participate in this too, so that we can blow the doors off of voter registration, because the other side is trying to find ways to keep people from voting. We're finding ways to get more people to vote.
Okay. Well, we're at the end of our hour. And I could talk for another 2 hours about this because I am the ultimate political junkie, but I assume everyone else has a life to lead. I do want to thank Daniel Squadron, Mitch Cates, and Representative Jared Solomon for being here. I would ask everybody on this Zoom to go to the Future Now, go to the Future Now page, learn about their work, form a giving circle, and get involved in state politics. There are many people from many different states on this call. Go to Future Now. If you're interested in getting involved in PA state activities, I can connect you with Mitch and provide you with his email address. And I urge all of you to support Representative Jared Solomon and donate generously to him. We need many, many more Jareds in the State House. Dan wrote something in the chat that's so true. It's not just the district that needs to be won, it's the whole chamber. And we need to start winning chambers in Wisconsin, in Arizona, in Georgia, in Florida, and in Pennsylvania. Look at the recent Florida law. The Republicans there thought Georgia not giving people water was such a good idea that in Florida, they would do the exact same thing, criminalize giving water. The GOP wants to stop people from voting, but we need to stop them. So get involved. If you would like to continue your support of DJOP, we would really appreciate a contribution. You can go to djop.org, and we would invite you to attend our next event on the filibuster. It's another free Zoom event where we have former U.S. Senator Barbara Boxer and former State Senator Wendy Davis. You'll remember she filibustered in her track shoes. And we're going to talk about the need to reform the filibuster. So please join us for that event on May 20th. You can sign up in the link here or by going to djop.org and click on the events tab. Thank you everyone for your time. I know time is precious. Thank you again to our speakers, and happy birthday, Dina Lickman-Smith. It is her birthday today. So thank you and see you next time. Bye-bye.